welcome to the webinar series from the Eye and Ear Foundation called Sight and Sound Bites. This bi-weekly webinar series highlights research at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Today's topic, advances in drug delivery for glaucoma, dry eye, and other eye diseases. I'm Lawton Snyder, CEO of the Eye and Ear Foundation. The Eye and Ear Foundation supports research to advance care for vision, hearing, balance, voice, and cancers of the head and neck at the two world-renowned Departments of Ophthalmology and Otolaryngology at the University of Pittsburgh. The funds we provide from the Eye and Ear Foundation to support research are made possible only because of philanthropic donations, and they have those donations have led to a lot of stimulus support that's driven some of the advanced technology and new discoveries that you're going to hear about today. So thank you all who have supported the Eye and Ear Foundation, and thank you for joining us today. Little housekeeping rules for our webinar series. This is a Zoom product. You recognize it. It looks like what you do with your kids and grandkids, but we're going to disable chat. If you're used to chatting during a Zoom, the chat is disabled for our webinars, but we ask people to please use the Q&A button at the bottom and type questions. You can ask a question anytime during the program today. We'll save all the questions. I'll read the question to the panelist at the end of the program. So please refrain, if you can, from asking personal health questions. I usually just skip over them if they're not something I think the rest of the audience would like to learn from. But we will answer your questions, any of your questions. If you have a personal health question, I recommend that you email it to Craig Smith, and his email was in your invitation. You'll receive a survey that will be sending out to you about today's program. We appreciate the response to those surveys. We get good responses to surveys, and they've helped us with the programs that we put together. And we'll be adding you to our list for future webinars, and thank you again for coming today. I'm excited about today's program. As I said, the title, Advances in Drug Delivery for Glaucoma, Dry Eye, and Other Eye Diseases. There's new things coming out all the time. You're going to hear a lot about those today, and I think in a very exciting format by two really excellent speakers. First, we'll have Dr. Ian Connor. Dr. Connor is an assistant professor of ophthalmology, chief of ophthalmology at UPMC Shadyside, and associate residency program director. He's also a diplomat for the American Board of Ophthalmology. You'll also be hearing from Dr. Morgan Fedorchak. Dr. Fedorchak is an assistant professor of ophthalmology and bioengineering and clinical and translational sciences. So again, two really outstanding presenters, and we are going to start with Dr. Connor right now. Thank you, and welcome, Dr. Connor.
Thanks, Lonnie, for that great introduction, and thanks to the Eye and Ear Foundation for putting these together. I really think that these are great service to our community here in Pittsburgh, and hopefully beyond the Burgh as well. So as Lonnie said, I am the director of the glaucoma service here at UPMC, and have some other hats that I wear as well. But one of the things that I get to do that is really most exciting for me is collaborate and work with some of our really terrific investigators here in the department who are working hard to help us find new treatments and cures for the diseases that we all deal with. As a glaucoma doctor, obviously, I have some biases to which diseases are the most important, but dry eye, of course, we know is really prevalent in our population, and then there are other eye diseases, including diseases of the retina, that we'll discuss a little bit here today as well. So, what's the problem that we're really trying to address here? Well, as you probably know, if you're tuned into the webinar here, you recognize that lots of eye diseases require treatment with eye drops. It's the primary way that we get medicine into the ocular tissues. Glaucoma is a pretty common example, and I have patients who are on 1 eye drop a day, 2 eye drops a day, 3 or more eye drops per day, which can become a lot of work. Dry eye is, ubiquitous. I spent a few days recently in the desert in the Southwest, and dry eye there is sort of a different beast than it is here. But no matter where you live on the planet, dry eye as we get older is a really common disorder that affects a lot of people. Infection, if a person has an infection in their eye, we call that keratitis, is the most common type of infection. And keratitis or ulcers require very frequent dosing with eye drops that can really become a burden for the patient. And finally, inflammatory diseases like uveitis or diseases of the retina that cause swelling in the neural tissues of the eye can be really visually disruptive and often require frequent eye drop dosing as well. As anyone who uses eye drops knows, instilling the eye drops is not easy at all, and there are many barriers to using eye drops for our patients, including the fact that many of our patients have poor eyesight. You're trying to put a drop on a target that is difficult to see from, and it's not a surprise that a lot of these drops miss, and it can become very frustrating. Coordination is also an issue. As we get older, the coordination in our joints and muscles becomes worse, and simply getting the drop to land on the target of the eye can become a real challenge. And musculoskeletal disease is also, of course, very common among my treated patient population. Arthritis is really incredibly common, and it can be difficult to even squeeze the bottle to get the drop to come out. So these are all pretty well known and well recognized problems with eye drops as a way to administer drug. Adherence to treatment, not surprisingly, given these barriers, can be pretty poor, and there's a vast literature on this in our in our science. And the adherence can be poor because of the frequency of dosing. If you're using 1 drop a day, it's not so bad. If you're using 8 drops a day from 3 different bottles, it can become very difficult to remember to use the drops at the proper time. It's important when we use the drops to follow the instructions. Some of our drops require refrigeration, some do not. Some require shaking the bottle, some do not. And all of these factors, if not performed correctly, can decrease the likelihood that the medication will work the way it is intended. And then finally, wastage of drops is a real problem because we have all these barriers to actually using the drops and getting the drops into the ocular tissues. It's not a surprise that a fair number of the drops will run down your cheek or down into your sinuses, where they're not doing a lot of good for treating the eye disease, but they do result in running out of eye drops before the treatment is up or before the month is up for chronic medications. So all of these are really incredible barriers for us to overcome in treating eye disease the way that it needs to be treated. And I think it goes without saying then that topical medications don't work if the patient can't deliver them consistently into the tissue of interest. So the solution, I think, is probably fairly obvious to a lot of folks, and that is to use some sort of administration that allows sustained release or extended release of the medication. We're all familiar with this in the medications that we take for other diseases of the body. So anybody who takes a pill once a day is likely taking a sustained release formula of some sort because the kinetics of giving a drug are such that unless you take the drug frequently throughout the day, it's likely to run out, to sort of lose its effectiveness a few hours after you take it, and then you have to take another one unless there's some sustained release strategy in place. So this principle can apply to eye drops as well. And instead of frequent eye drop dosing, drugs could be delivered much less frequently. And something that a lot of people I think would be very interested in would be monthly dosing or even less frequent dosing for chronic conditions. And then for acute conditions like an infection, one could imagine giving a medication once and having enough of a dose to last for the week or two that is necessary. And the example in other fields of medicine is antibiotics. If you could just take one antibiotic pill that would last for 14 days, I think most of us would accept that pretty readily. I've included this graph just to illustrate that point again of the importance of sustained release medications. A lot of people don't think carefully about, but it becomes pretty clear if you think for a moment about the fact that when we take a medication, there is a potentially toxic level of that medication in our body. So when we take an immediate release or IR medication, it's very common that we get a dose in our body that exceeds the toxic level. That's the level at which we begin to experience side effects instead of the desired effects. And then as the immediate release medication is metabolized, the level in the body falls below the minimum effective level. And then we take the medication again, and we raise up through the ideal dosing level to the toxic level again, and then back to the minimum effective level. And we spend all of our time oscillating between these two extremes and only a portion of the time in that ideal dosing zone. So what a sustained release medication, or SR in this graph, does is it allows us to spend most of our time within the ideal dosing zone, and then we can redose according to the kinetics in order to achieve the maximal effect. So I've included here in the next few slides some examples that currently exist of sustained release medication dosing, and then Dr. Fedorchak is going to talk about some of the solutions that her lab has pioneered and is really working toward that maybe represent some improvement on these technologies. So examples of dosing outside of the eye include a strategy called the OcuCert. So the OcuCert was around for a number of years, and it was a treatment for glaucoma, where a medication called pilocarpine was instilled into this sustained release device that was placed on the ocular surface into the inferior fornix. So that's behind the lower eyelid, as you can see in the photograph. More recently, we have had available this product called Dextenza. Dextenza is a biodegradable punctal plug. So many people on the forum here may be familiar with punctal plugs for dry eye disease. They simply occlude one of the tear ducts and prevent your tears from leaving into your sinuses. So the Dextenza is a little pellet that is inserted into the tear duct and elutes dexamethasone, which is a topical steroid for the treatment of postoperative inflammation. Inside the eye, we can also inject biodegradable materials. So the Ozurdex is also a dexamethasone pellet, but this is injected into the eye, in fact, into the posterior section of the eye behind the iris, in order to treat swelling of the retina. That's what macular edema is. And the macular edema can be secondary to inflammation. It can be secondary to a type of blood clot in the eye, or it can be secondary to diabetic disease. So there's a lot of reasons why a person can develop that condition, but the Ozurdex is used to treat that in a sustained way. And then more recently, we have this Durista implant that has become available. And bimatoprost is a drug that some people here may use to treat their glaucoma. This is loaded onto a biodegradable pellet and injected into the front chamber of the eye, where it slowly elutes and works its way into the ocular tissues to lower the intraocular pressure. Finally, this novel idea called the iDose is still in development and in clinical trials. We expect will probably be available in the next year or so. And the iDose is a little pellet, as you can see in the photograph to the left. It's a little stent actually that fits into the canal schlemm in the anterior chamber angle of the eye, and has drug loaded into it, which elutes slowly into the front chamber of the eye as well. And this technology could be used with a lot of different types of drug. And that's currently what the company is working through in order to determine the best usage of this technology. Of course, these technologies have a lot of promise, but they also do have some drawbacks. In the external delivery platforms, the ones that are delivered to the surface of the eye, the OcuCert fell out of favor after a number of years because many patients could not tolerate it. It did feel like a foreign body located behind the lower eyelid, just as a lot of people can tolerate wearing contact lenses, but many cannot. The OcuCert had its fans, and it also had its detractors. The other problem with external delivery platforms is that it can be difficult to control the drug delivery to tissue of interest, and it's not uncommon for drug delivery to occur to tissues around the eye, including the skin, around the eyelid, and into the sinuses via the puncta. For the internal delivery platform, some of the drawbacks include inconsistent biodegradability. So I've certainly seen patients who've had these pellets injected into their eyes where the pellet degrades very quickly over the course of a few months. And I've also seen patients at whom the pellet is still present even many months later. As a result, collateral damage to adjacent tissue can occur, although it's relatively uncommon, but it is something we worry about. And of course, because it's an injected medication or pellet into the eye, reversal or removal of these procedures can be invasive and can even require surgery in the operating room. So what we'd like to do now is to talk about some of the ways that here at Pitt, we're trying to address these drawbacks with a newer technology. So I'll turn this over now to Dr. Fedorchak, who's going to discuss this with us.
Thank you, Ian. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. So I think Ian did a great job. Dr. Connor did a terrific job of summarizing some of the issues here. And what I'm going to transition to is what I would call the engineer summary of that. So to break it down into maybe the simplest explanation here, the simple solution being these topical eye drops are not effective for a number of reasons, which Dr. Connor just did a great job describing. And the effective solution, these intraocular implants, these various devices, they're not very simple. They have a number of potential complications, and they are logistically more difficult because of the need for this procedure to implant them. So as I talk about what we're doing at the university to address these issues, I don't want to ignore the fact or pretend like we're the only ones doing this. There are a number of pipeline technologies. So different technologies being developed at other universities and by other companies in various stages of development. And these are all newer systems that want to combine the benefits of eye drops or topical front of the eye, ocular surface systems with these long-lasting delivery methods. So keeping it non-invasive and simple, but also providing for long periods of time between doses. One such option that's in development are these drug-loaded contact lenses, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a regular contact lens that's been impregnated with drug in one way or another. There's a number of ways to do this. Lots of these are in development for different ocular diseases. And essentially, you load it up with drug, and over a period of time, maybe a day, maybe a week, the drug is released from the contact lens to the ocular surface, and it gives you the same effect as those eye drops. This is another system here on the far right. This is something called the Helios, which is in development. This, I believe, is actually in clinical trials. And this is something that, again, is impregnated with drug. It's a ring, a plastic ring that is fit to the outside of the eye. And you can see there's just a tiny little piece of it that's left showing. And this releases drug for, I believe, 6 months. So these are options that, as I said, combine some of the simpler methods that are non-invasive with very long-term drug release. And here at the University of Pittsburgh, we're also working on something similar. We call it solid drop, which is kind of a jazzy name that is just a way of describing what this material is and what it does. This is a long-term gel-based eye drop, and it consists of two parts. One part is the drug releasing component, which are polymer microspheres that are loaded up with the drug of interest. And the other part is actually the carrier for those microspheres, and that is the gel that we're talking about. This is an eye drop that's administered for glaucoma. It would be administered once a month. So this is in preclinical development, meaning it is not yet being used in patients. We're developing it still here at the university for a number of drugs and diseases. But in our testing so far, what we've shown is that we can get 1 month's worth of drug delivery from a single drop, as opposed to those daily drops in glaucoma. And I'm going to speak a bit more about this as we move through these slides. Some things to point out here. One of the reasons we wanted to develop this is to make it more convenient for patients. We wanted something that was comfortable, very safe and tolerable for patients. And we also wanted to stick with the eye drop-like administration so that it's something very familiar. A lot of what you've seen from Dr. Connor and with the slide I just showed with that Helios device and the contact lenses, those are maybe a bit unusual for patients. It's something unique and different that they haven't done before or had done to their eyes. Whereas with an eye drop, even though the technology in the eye drop is somewhat advanced, The administration itself is very familiar, very comfortable, and easy. And at the same time, we're decreasing the dosing frequency, so the time between drops would be dramatically longer. And along with that, because with a decreased dosing frequency, there's a higher likelihood that patients are able to get the right amount of drug at the right time, in the right intervals. We would hope that the risk of blindness from something like glaucoma would go down as well. And as Ian had mentioned before about drug going where it shouldn't be going, one of the things we can do with our technology is localize drug to the ocular surface and really prevent a lot of those side effects you may see from eye drop medication because the drug is targeting the tissues of interest. So these videos here are showing the material. I described the gel material, and this is a really important part of this solid drop system. It is a liquid eye drop at room temperature. So on the left, you see the liquid coming out of the syringe. Once it hits that beaker full of hot water, and we've stained it here with fluorescein just to make it look cool and easier to see. Once it hits that beaker full of hot water, it immediately transitions from a liquid to a gel. It is a solid, but it's not a rigid solid. It's very soft, very pliable, and it's got lots of water in it, which gives it this gel-like consistency. And then on the right, what we're showing is that that entire gel, even though it started as a liquid, it can be removed as one solid piece. It retains its structural integrity, which means that removal of this would be very straightforward. So you have drug-loaded microspheres inside this gel, and it sits in the space beneath your lower eyelid, similar to that OcuCert that Dr. Connor had showed previously. And it releases drug for as long as you need it to from that space. Here are some more videos, and I apologize. I know it's kind of the lunchtime hour here, and these are preclinical videos where we're showing some animal experimentation, but I think that, you know, to give a proper talk on this topic and to show you really how cool and interesting this is, I think you need to see it in action. So here on the left, I'm going to show installation of the drop. And you can see how this gel is super pliable. It actually conforms to the size and space of that pocket. You can see water coming out of it. That's part of what makes this technology so unique, is that it's very water loving. It retains a lot of water, but it doesn't dissolve in water. And that makes it very comfortable. It allows for the eye to move independent of the gel. So there's no stickiness to it. And it just sits in that pocket. And you can see here on the left picture at the bottom corner, after we've instilled it, it forms almost like a film in that pocket. So it's quite small and thin. And the animals in these studies are completely unbothered by it. At no point are they sedated or anything like that. And they tolerate it very well. And if you know anything about rabbits, that's really saying something, because they're bothered by pretty much everything. On the right, we have a video showing removal. And this video, let me mute the sound here. I'll show this one more time because it's quick. In this video, you can see that we just take some room temperature saline. We fill that pocket and the entire gel drop transitions back to a liquid and it's flushed out very simply and easily. So removal of this, one of the things that we were very concerned about is making sure that everything gets removed all at once. We want to have a hard stop where, almost like a contact lens, you take it out and replace it with a new one. You want to make sure there's nothing left behind. And so the way that this works, because the gel itself doesn't degrade, we don't have to worry about material being left behind. Some of the other advantages I'll mention here: we're using less drug than an eye drop. Over the course of 1 month for glaucoma, we use about 100 times less drug, but we see the same therapeutic effect. And this is really important, not only because it means that we can treat the disease effectively, but it also means that there would be fewer side effects. Less drug, as long as it's going where you want it to go, you really want to minimize the amount of drug that you're delivering, because that minimizes the chance that you get those off-site effects, that you have drug going where it shouldn't be going, causing those side effects. We also don't need preservatives in this system. The drug is shielded from water and other elements that may degrade it. And so we're able to store this in a shelf-stable manner without preservatives. And that's really important because oftentimes in eye drops, the preservatives are what causes a lot of the irritation on the ocular surface. So this is quite helpful that we can store it without preservatives. It's also helpful that it doesn't interfere with the cornea. There's no involvement of the cornea whatsoever, so we don't have to worry about blocking vision. There's no interference with contact lens use. And so this is really pretty widely useful or applicable to many different patients, regardless of what else they have going on in and around their eyes. And to that end, it's also very easy to see. So like a contact lens, you need to be able to take it out of your eye. This also needs to be visible, and it's got that opaque white color. It's very easy to see in that pocket, and it's easy to remove. And we had said earlier, Ian had said that we would talk a bit more about other diseases. So we're not just working on this for glaucoma. We're looking at these materials for a wide range of drugs and diseases. We've done some studies in dry eye. We've done some studies in inflammation and infection. So these would be more short-term use. And we've also looked at pediatric patients as well, which I'll describe a bit more in a second as I wrap up. We can target the back of the eye potentially with some of these systems, and we've started to work in that area for things like wet AMD and gene therapy delivery. That's a newer area that we're working in with these same materials. And then another important feature here, particularly for glaucoma, is that we can deliver more than one drug at a time. So for different schedules of drug release, you can actually deliver simultaneously 2 or more drugs. And that's important because so many glaucoma patients are put on combination therapy. To date, we've had a lot of results. We've been working on this now for a long time, 8 years maybe. And we've shown that we can treat glaucoma for 28 days, that we have the same therapeutic efficacy as those daily eye drops, twice daily eye drops. We've shown that we can prevent infection. So for short-term use, we can use an antibiotic delivery system to prevent infection in animals. We've shown that we can achieve simultaneous delivery of 2 different glaucoma drugs on different schedules. And then we've done something with a disease called cystinosis. And this is the last thing I'll mention here, but I think it's among the most exciting use for this. Cystinosis is an orphan disease, so not many people have it. And it affects mostly children. And these children are required to take eye drops in order to treat the effects of this disease in their cornea. Those eye drops are administered once per waking hour on the ideal schedule. It's very difficult for kids to do this, kids in school, kids who are just don't want to be bothered with hourly eye drops. And so what we've been working on is a daily drop instead of an hourly drop. And along with this, we've shown that these materials are far more shelf stable. So the drops that cystinosis patients use have to be, they expire within 1 week of opening the bottle, and they have to be stored in refrigeration. And this is difficult for kids in school, but even if parents want to go traveling with their children, they constantly have to be aware of these eye drops and how they're storing them and how long they've been open. What we've shown is not only can we achieve daily drug release that's comparable to that hourly drop administration, we've also shown that these drops are stable at room temperature for 7 weeks or more. So that's a tremendous advantage when it comes to storing and using these drops, and anything that increases the convenience and the tolerability for these is going to be quite helpful in making sure that patients are getting the right amount of drug. And we anticipate that because of these results that we've seen that are very promising, very exciting, we anticipate that this would be the first product that would be filed with the FDA as we seek permission to do a clinical trial. And that would be sometime next year in 2022. The last thing I'll say, the absolute last thing before we get to your questions, which is the most important part of this, I can't do any of this without help from our funding sources. I can't do any of this without help from the trainees and particularly the clinical experts and the other scientific experts that help us do this work. There's a whole team of people that have made this possible. So thank you to all of them. And also thank you to the audience members, those of you who care about this and support this work and are interested. That's part of what helps keep this going. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And now, as I was requested to do, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we can take your questions.
Well, thank you both so very much. I already see a lot of questions coming in, and I have to say, personally, this is one of those projects that I've followed very closely. Morgan, I know you've been working on this for many years, but but in general, I appreciate that hearing about all of the other solutions that are coming down the pike as well, or even those that are already available, and being able to compare them, because certainly there's advantages, disadvantages to all of them, but I think anybody watching this would have to be pretty excited about the opportunity that persists with solid drop, of course, but and that's not being biased as we're at the University of Pittsburgh, but I can tell you, and I'll tell the audience here, I have a close family member who's dealing with glaucoma. So I see how difficult it is to take eye drops every day, and I know that that these types of solutions certainly can be life-changing, and I think also, hopefully very vision-saving. Eye drops, of course, work for glaucoma. Dr. Connor would tell you, but it's a burden when you are told that you have to do this for the rest of your life. It's a burden, and for some people, a difficult burden. So thank you, and we're looking forward to getting to some of these questions. So first one, does a sustained release eye drop allow children with eye diseases to have an easier time at school? And what would a school nurse need to be taught to help handle the eye drops in case there were issues during the day?
I guess I could take this one. So this is very relevant to what we're working on, actually. I think it's not trivial at all, the idea of kids in school and eye drops. Just kids in general, getting them to properly adhere to their whatever drug regimen they may need is not the simplest thing. I have young kids, and I would hate the idea of having to give them an eye drop every day, let alone every hour. So would sustained release help kids in school who may have to see the nurse for that eye drop? Absolutely. I think that, again, just like with glaucoma, to the extent that you're able to decrease the dosing frequency, it's going to make it that much easier. Every time you put an eye drop in, that's another opportunity to not get the right amount of drug. So if it's once a day, that's one time you got to do it correctly. If it's 3 times a day, that's 3 times you have to do it correctly. And when you're talking about kids, that's parents that need to be able to do it. That's nurses that need to be able to do it. And everybody needs to know how to do it correctly. And there is a really appropriate way to do it, and then there's a lot of incorrect ways to do it. So yes, sustained release can help. I would say in an ideal scenario, sustained release would offer the opportunity for a parent to administer the drop, send the child off to school, and not have to worry about it for the rest of the day. That once a day should really be the ideal target, where those kids don't have to take medicine with them. They don't need to go see the nurse unless there's an issue. And with solid drop, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to make it easily visible. If a kid says, I'm not sure if my eye drop is still in, the nurse would only need to know to check that pocket and see if it's there. And if it's not there, then sure, there would be a course of action to take associated with that. But that's one of the reasons why it needs to be something that you can see at all times. We don't anticipate that it'll get dislodged very easily. It's very well retained in every study that we've done. But I think that once a day offers the opportunity to kind of take the school nurse out of the picture. Nothing against school nurses, but I think that if we can decrease the burden on anyone, be it the patient, the caregivers, the nurses, all of that, I think that's very helpful. So my answer is yes, but I can imagine and I would hope that there's a scenario where that would not even be of concern at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, very, very well said, Morgan. I completely agree. It's a game changer for kids.
Thank you. So are there any treatments available for intermittent excessive eye watering?
So, I think it's important to note that there are a variety of reasons, a variety of pathologies that can lead to watery eyes. And it's important to determine exactly what the cause is. Most commonly, it's sort of run-of-the-mill or some version of run-of-the-mill dry eye disease. But that can be treated even in different ways, depending on the patient and the examination findings. Sometimes it's not just that. Sometimes there's, actual eyelid disease or obstruction of the tear ducts, and that would need to be diagnosed as well. So it's sort of a broad question that's hard to answer specifically. The do no harm answer is to use artificial tears, as needed at least 3 or 4 times a day, because that is the standard of care treatment at this time. But we would like to imagine that there would be ways to administer some medication for a specific dry eye pathology, assuming that that's the diagnosis, that wouldn't require dosing eye drops 3 or 4 times a day, but maybe just, infrequently, once a month or so.
So this audience member says this may sound like an odd question. There are no odd questions. You can ask anything. But what is the ongoing comfort of these solutions, particularly those that sit deeper in the eye pocket, like the plastic ring, for example? I have to say that plastic ring looked very uncomfortable. Is it? Do we know?
So I did put an OcuCert in what's called a Lacrocert. So it didn't elute pilocarpine. It eluted one of the base components of a lot of the artificial tear products. But I put one in my own eye a couple of years ago when I was a resident, and it felt to me, an experienced contact lens user, like a very uncomfortable contact lens. So
okay.
I could have worn it had I needed to, but I was happy to remove it after a few minutes. And I suspect that my experience is very similar to a lot of folks. I think an important point to be made has to do with the difference between having something sitting behind your eyelid that is the shape that it is, because that's the shape that it came out of the factory, versus something that conforms to the shape of your individual eye when it's instilled. So, it's like a custom fit pair of shoes that were made just for you, compared to, just an off the shelf, a tailored suit, if you will.
Yeah, obviously, I guess if it looks uncomfortable, it might be. And good for you for taking it, taking it yourself to make sure you could tell your patients what it felt like.
Yeah.
I think it's important as a physician to try.
I guess it would be the moment where can we stop recording for a second while I admit that I've put solid drop in my eye and Ian's there for it, but it was totally sterile and N of 1 and off the books. But I will say that I agree with Ian. The rigid solid materials, they're rigid. I mean, it's like putting something that is that shape. It doesn't fit to your eye. It's not curved. It's not meant to be that way. And so that's what it's going to feel like. And I think that, you have to, it's not just about comfort, it's about how well it stays put. And if it's not fitting to that shape, then there's the opportunity that it may move around a bit. And I think another big part of it is how much water it's able to take in. So you don't want something that's going to stick to the ocular surface at all. You don't want something that's going to dry out. That would be very problematic. And so with anything, you want to make sure that the eye can move very easily with something else in your eye, that it's not causing any kind of that foreign body sensation. Maybe it's not hurting, maybe it's not uncomfortable, but you just feel that something's there. I think that water is really important, that keeping a nice moist material on the surface of the eye is really important for that as well. But I'm biased.
Well, I think that we'll have some more specific data to this point, assuming that the cystinosis work goes ahead.
Absolutely.
Cystinosis is an uncomfortable corneal disease for kids. So they are uncomfortable and light sensitive all of the time.
Yeah.
And if kids in that trial tolerate the solid drop, anyone will tolerate the solid drop.
Yeah,
Right.
Well said. Even just hearing about that condition just makes me, weep for those parents. That would be so, and the kids, of course, and how difficult a situation that would be. So, so I hope this works, Morgan. Thank you. So, somebody asked if we could go over the side effects of the glaucoma drops again, maybe Ian, if you would.
Sure. So the primary side effect is ocular surface toxicity. Most of our glaucoma drops have a preservative in them that allow them to be shelf stable for for many months. And the preservative is, as all preservatives, toxic to living things. That's the whole point of preservatives. Now, they're more toxic to single-celled organisms like bacteria than they are to multi-celled organisms like people. But there still is some toxicity, and the preservatives damage the tissue on the surface of the eye. And the longer you use glaucoma medications and the more glaucoma medications you use each day, the worse that toxicity becomes. So unfortunately, glaucoma doctors are manufacturers of dry eye disease with the medications that we prescribe for our patients. That's the primary side effect. A lot of the medications work by penetrating into the tissue of the eye that actually makes the fluid. Because we want to lower the pressure, we can either make the fluid get out of the eye better, or we can make the eye make less fluid. We have to balance that equation one way or another. So by definition, if we're using a drug that makes the normally functioning tissue of the eye function worse, we are poisoning that tissue. We're making it not do what it's physiologically supposed to do. And some of that drug can escape into the sinuses. We'll see effects. If you put a drop in one eye, sometimes we see effects in the other eye. The pressure will go down in both eyes because it travels through the bloodstream to the other eye. And some of those drops have effects on other types of receptors around the body, in the cardiovascular system in particular. So there can be effects on the heart rate and on the blood pressure in particular from the medications that we use, the glaucoma medications. So anything that we can do to decrease those, if you remember the graph I showed, those excursions into the toxic range, into the side effect range of medication is really going to help us.
And I imagine, just like anything, the benefits, for the most part, obviously the benefit of using eye drops is you'll save your vision, but and they generally would outweigh most of those side effects. Am I right in saying that, Dr.
Right.
Connor?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. I mean, that is the name of the game for a physician, is to weigh the risks to the patient against the benefits to the patient. And if the benefit outweighs the risk by, enough of a margin, then that's what we do or recommend.
So would dry eye be a problem to use the solid drop, either making it last less or stick to the mucosa?
So that's a great question. I think that really great segue from Dr. Connor there, talking about preservatives and what causes that feeling of dry eye for something like glaucoma drops. And even just the frequent re-administration of drops, you're disrupting the natural tear film, which exists for a reason. So fewer drops is going to be better to begin with. So we have that advantage when it comes to that dry eye, the potential for dry eye, but also without the need for preservatives and with far less drug, it should really work to prevent any dry eye from occurring, or at least mitigate the effects of that particular side effect here. And I think that because of the way the gel is, I keep talking about how, this water that gets in there, just to explain a bit more, when I say that it holds a lot of water, this is a hydrogel. The best way that I can describe this, so everybody gets a sense for just how much water these materials can hold in such a small capacity. Hydrogels are the same thing that are put inside disposable diapers. So you can imagine, those take in a lot of liquid, and they don't, unless you stick them in a pool, they don't really blow up that big. Those materials are designed to swell slightly in water and just suck up tons of water, and they retain that water, and it gives them really nice rheological properties. They're very smooth, they're very soft, they're very amenable to biological use. And those are the same class of materials that we're using in solid drop. And so I like to think not only will it not cause dry eye, but it may actually work to help prevent some of those feelings of dry eye. And at the very least, because we're decreasing the dosing frequency, because we're using less drug, you have that going for you at least. So it's going to represent a major advantage over traditional eye drops in glaucoma, and potentially even a greater advantage when it comes to feelings of just kind of day-to-day dry eye.
Morgan, for patients who have true aqueous production deficiency, so these are often my rheumatologic patients, patients with rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Sjogren's syndrome. Is there any reason why solid drop couldn't be impregnated with both a glaucoma drop and a medication like cyclosporin or Restasis that helps to treat those conditions?
Absolutely. I mean, the question of can we do it is a hard yes. For sure we can. The difficult part is that, now we're talking about FDA approval, and you could have these drug-loaded microspheres, you could have one formulation for every drug that we care about in ophthalmology. You could have cyclosporin, you could have every glaucoma drug ever made, you could have antibiotics, you could have all of your steroids that you want, and you could just pull them off the shelf, mix them in the gel, and there you go. You have your combination solid drop for infection prophylaxis and anti-inflammatory drugs and everything else. The problem is that the FDA sees that as a new drug product every single time we change not just the drugs that are in it, but even just the dosing of the drugs, the amount of drug that goes into it, which is great from a safety perspective. We really want to make sure that products that are getting approved are safe, but it makes it really difficult from an approval standpoint, because every time we want to make a new product, we have to go through the same approval pathway. There are some shortcuts you can take when the materials themselves have been in an FDA approved product, but it's not much. And so it's expensive and time consuming. And so yes, you can do that. Whether or not it makes sense is really going to be determined by a lot of business-like factors that as a scientist, I don't necessarily get too into. But honestly, I think that you could use, I think the likelihood that you could load it up with comfort agents, just things that kind of help ameliorate some of those feelings of dry eye, that is very likely. And that may actually make its way into the final formulation for not the active pharmaceutical ingredients, for just the gel itself, just to kind of aid in some of that feeling of comfort with the drop. The future for solid drop, there are many different pathways we could take. And I think dry eye is a real huge area of opportunity for us. And I wish so much that we could do that off the shelf mixing, maybe someday, but right now the approval process hasn't quite caught up with the technology in terms of where drug delivery has moved. And so hopefully someday that changes, but at the very least, it's encouraging to know that when and if these things get FDA approved, they will be tremendously safe to use in your eyes, because they will have gone through every possible hoop they need to jump through in order to get approval.
Well, and kind of a good segue, I guess, to this next question. Will these treatments allow for reduced cost of pharmacological therapy?
Oh, more business talk. Okay, so this is a difficult one to answer because there's a lot of trade-offs here. We're using less drug, so that's going to be a cost saving. But we're using some additional materials, so that's going to be an additional cost. The amount to which these offset remains to be seen. But I think that it's, at the end of the day, it becomes less a question of what is the cost of this. And really the most important question is, will this be covered by health insurance, and to what extent? Right. So the cost, I'm hoping that it will be pretty similar in cost. I mean, yes, it may be more expensive for the materials, but it's once a month instead of every single day. So there's just less of it that you need. So that's good. And I think that those may balance out. But I think at the end of the day, what matters for anything, every technology that's made in a lab like mine lives and dies by whether or not it can be reimbursed. And this is an area where it's so important that there are other technologies helping to kind of pave the way for something like solid drop, because they're already going through that process where they are demonstrating what they need to demonstrate in order to get that health insurance reimbursement. And I think that, really it will end up being something that becomes quite standard. And it may seem like an issue that we have competition, but it is a really good thing. And I think for patients, what they should want, for glaucoma patients especially, is a portfolio of options, all of which are accessible and inexpensive, that they can use and feel comfortable using, that they are safe and effective, And that's really what the field is working towards. So having competition, having these other systems that we talked about is a really good thing for financial reasons, for safety reasons, and just for creating a portfolio of options for patients that just makes a lot of sense.
And I'm sure you could extrapolate that the cost savings could also apply to the healthcare system, as we are treating a condition that can lead to additional vision loss, or any of these conditions lead to additional vision loss more effectively than we would essentially be, impacting society in terms of our cost of healthcare in general. Again, an extrapolation, but I think a fair one given anything that we look at in healthcare to try to reduce cost. So, okay, will any of these developments change the eye drop procedure with cataract surgery?
So potentially, we talked about the fact that sometimes you just need to use medications for a short period of time. And after cataract surgery is really an excellent example of that. So we very commonly will use an antibiotic as prophylaxis against infection for about a week. And I'm sure Morgan can speak to some of the work they've already done in investigating that possibility. And then we very commonly use an anti-inflammatory medication like a steroid or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drop for a couple of weeks to a month after cataract surgery. So, from my perspective as a surgeon, it would be wonderful if instead of having the patient use eye drops for, several weeks after the surgery, I could just put a single drop on their eye at the end of surgery, wheel them out of the operating room, and then that's it. And I know that they're getting the medication in their eye. I know they'll be prophylaxed against infection, and I know that they'll have plenty of anti-inflammatory medication in order to help with wound healing.
It makes
totally
sense.
Agree. That's something that we've done some studies on. And, fortunately here at Pitt, we have really great access to some amazing models for things like that, ocular infection. And we're able to take a look at how well this would work. And I think for chronic use, solid drop makes a lot of sense. There's something really, really appealing though about this short-term use where the physician puts it in and just sends the patient on their way. No need to fill a prescription, no need to do any kind of, aftercare at home besides just rest. And then you come in for that follow-up appointment and you've done everything you need to. It's really an autonomous system. And I think that for something like cataracts, it makes a lot of sense. For one reason, because of just the sheer number of those procedures that are done. But also just because it makes it so much easier on patients. And then the physicians would know that those patients are getting the drugs they need for as long as they need. And I think it just really would be an added level of security after a procedure like that.
Excellent. So are there any worthwhile devices to make using eye drops easier, more effective? Obviously, maybe available today, worthwhile devices to make using eye drops easier and more effective?
Yeah, so I think this is it's a highly, there's a lot of issues. So it's a highly individualized question in that there are definitely some drop aids, and you could just go on Amazon and search for eye drop aids that will snap onto the bottle that help. If the primary problem is actually squeezing the plastic, then they can help transmit the energy into a bigger squeeze. So you're not squeezing with your fingertips, but more with your hand. So if that's the issue, then the eye drop aids can help. Some of the aids have a sort of little brace or guide built into them that you can press against your eyebrow as you tilt your head back and administer the drop. And that can be helpful if that's really the issue, is finding your eye, because now you're using your tactile sensation rather than having to see the drop. If the issue is that a person's having trouble with the dosing schedule, well then, most of us carry a little computer around in our pockets now, and there are free apps available that you can use to schedule not only your eye drops, but your other medications that you might take during the day. And they even have little check boxes, so when you use the medication, you click the check box to keep a record instead of a paper record of when you use your drops. So it just depends on the issue that a person has. None of these solutions are really ideal. They're all adaptations that can help people use the medications. But again, I think the theme of this is that we all have this dream of a better sustained release model so that we don't have to rely so much on those issues.
Well, again, to both of you, thank you, because one, you're working on solutions that'll make care better. That's what we want to support through the Eye and Ear Foundation. Our mission is to try to improve advanced care for patients in ophthalmology. And I think these are great examples of how we're really working hard at doing that. And I'm, again, happy to be part of that equation in terms of what we can provide for support. So thank you for everything that you do. And thank you to all of the audience here. I think we've gotten to all the, oh, I just got another one pop up. Let me see here. There's a few questions that we'll answer individually. I can see, then we've had a lot that, and I think this last one also will be one we'll answer individually. So we'll get to those questions, I promise. And thank you for those who submitted the questions that we read here today. And thank you for coming to hear what we wanted to share today with you related to these really exciting advances for ophthalmology, hopefully coming to you soon in your doctor's office. We'll sign off for now, and thank you until we'll come back in a couple weeks with another presentation from our otolaryngology department. And again, Dr. Fedorchak, Dr. Connor, thank you. Everybody, have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Lonnie.